1988. A boatyard in England. A gaff cutter sitting half-planked with the engine bay still open to the sky. The builder is offered 4 engines, a 20-horsepower Volvo, a 20-horsepower Yanmar, a 28-horsepower Volvo, and a Yanmar 3GM rated then at 27. The Yanmar is £500 cheaper. He takes it and spends the next 3 decades quietly wondering whether he cheaped out on the most important machine aboard. He sold that boat in 2022 to a retired master mariner from Denmark. The engine was still running when it left. 34 years is a long time to be right about £500, but the £500 was never the gap between 2 engines. It was the gap between a company that builds its own diesel and a company that buys one from somebody else and paints it green. Every part number in this video is published in the open. Most of it has been sitting in British parts catalogs for 2 decades, waiting for somebody to cross-reference it. The small green diesel under a sailboat companionway is not a Volvo. It never was. What engine is in your boat right now, and do you know who actually cast the block? Put it in the comments with the model. This is what Yachts and Boats covers. Subscribe so you catch the next investigation. E.D. Sherman is the Vice President of the American Boat and Yacht Council and runs its education division. He has spent years judging Cruising World's Boat of the Year competition, which means every autumn he climbs down into the engine bay of 24 brand new production sailboats and looks at what the builder actually bolted in. In one of those years, 11 of the 24 boats came with Yanmars and 10 came with Volvo Pentas. So he was not guessing. Writing in that magazine, Sherman set out who makes what in a single line. Volvo. Penta builds its larger engines in-house. The smaller ones, he wrote, are produced by Perkins and given a Volvo green paint job. Perkins Engines Company Limited sits in Peterborough, England. It has been a subsidiary of Caterpillar since February 1st, 1998. Caterpillar bought it from LucasVarity for $1.325 billion. The deal was announced on the 11th of December, 1997. Donald Feitz, then chairman of Caterpillar, said the combination would let his company compete with other full-line producers. So the engine in a Swedish-branded sailboat auxiliary belongs, at the bottom of the stack, to an American heavy equipment giant. That is already stranger than most owners realize. It gets stranger. Perkins did not design that engine either. The block came from Ishikawajima Shibaura Machinery, a Japanese firm inside Ishikawajima Industries. It was built for tractors, mowers, mini excavators, welders, and compressors. Perkins imported it, marinized it, and sold it as the Perama. Then Perkins sold the same unit to Volvo Penta, who put it in a catalog as the MD 2020. Stu Davies traced that chain in Practical Boat Owner in December 2022, working backwards from the engine in the magazine's own project boat. By 1996, the arrangement had grown large enough that Perkins and the Japanese firm formed a joint venture called Perkins Shibaura Engines, assembling the units in Peterborough from parts shipped out of Japan. And Volvo Penta was never the only buyer. Perkins sold that same block to Massey Ferguson, McCormick, Terramite, Textron, Jacobson, Cushman, Vermeer, Leach Lewis, JCB, Kobelco, and Northern Lights. In the United States, it moved through Detroit Diesel Allison, a distributor tied to the MTU conglomerate. Read that list again and notice what is actually on it: lawn equipment, mini excavators, welding sets, and generators. The engine. A sailor was told to trust on a night passage is the engine a golf course superintendent was sold to cut grass with. 4 owners stand between the Japanese foundry and the sailor writing the check, and not one of them was ever required to mention the other 3. That is the part that stays with me. Not the markup itself, but the silence around it. The pattern is not accidental. A chain of company names is a story. It is not proof. What turns it into proof is a 9-digit number stamped on a filter canister. Start with something bigger than a filter. The Volvo Penta D1 130 is the compact 3-cylinder in thousands of cruising boats under 40 feet. Order a replacement crankshaft from a specialist and you are sold a Perkins 403J11 crankshaft, not an equivalent, the Perkins part, under the Perkins designation. Order the cylinder head bolt set for the same engine and it arrives carrying Perkins part number T436734. The bolts holding down the head of a Volvo engine have a Perkins number on the bocarats. Now the filter. The spin-on oil filter for the Volvo Penta D120 and the MD2020 is Perkins part number 140517030. 68mm across the body, 86 tall, threaded 3/4 by 16 UNF. Volvo Penta sells that identical canister as 861473. 2 numbers, 1 filter. Most owners stop right there and go back to the coffee without ever opening the cross-reference sheet 1 click further down the same supplier page. It does not stop at 2 names. The same canister answers to Nissan 1520831000. Toyota lists it as 90915YZZ-A4. Yanmar, New Holland, Donaldson, Fleetguard, MAN, and W. IX. All carry it under numbers of their own. 1 canister, a Volvo Penta number and a Toyota number, printed against the same specification, sold through a dozen supply chains at a dozen different prices. The marine one is the expensive one. That number does not fit the story on the brochure. Which bothers you more, that the filter is a Toyota part, or that you have been buying it at marine pricing for years? The fuel filters run the same way. Perkins 4429491 is sold by Volvo Penta as 861477, and the cartridge filter that sits in the housing above it, 4326658 in Peterborough, becomes 3581078 in Gothenburg. These pairings are not hidden. They are printed in the public catalogues of British parts houses that supply both brands, and they are not confined to one model. The same Perkins numbers run across the D113, the D120, the D130, the D240, the D255, the D275, and the MD2020 through the MD2040. Now the part that changes the shape of this story. Being a Perkins is not a downgrade. Under the last video on this channel, a man wrote in to say his Perkins 4.236M has been running since 1964. Another sold a 44-foot sailboat whose Perkins was surveyed at 10,000 hours by a Perkins mechanic, who told the buyer it had another 10,000 in it. The same owner had a 1973 Ketch with a Perkins 4236. He sold it at close to 18,000 hours. The new owner took it from La Paz to Hawaii, then to Vancouver, then to the South Pacific for 2 years, then back to Vancouver. Original engine. Valves and injectors, nothing more. A third owner put it plainly. You can overhaul a Perkins for under $1,000, and that is with everything. 11 separate people named a Perkins without being asked to, more than any other brand. So if you own a green Volvo Penta, understand what is actually bolted to your engine beds. You own the engine those men have spent 40 years defending in comment sections and marina bars. Nothing about the green paint improved that casting, and nothing about it spoiled the casting either. What the paint changed was the invoice. The ledger does not lie, which raises the obvious problem. If the block is an industrial commodity, and industrial commodities are cheap, and the block is the part that never fails, then the money has to come from somewhere. It does. Colin Speedy writes for Attainable Adventure Cruising and has spent decades in small boats. He owns a Volvo Penta D255 in an aluminium ovni. He describes that engine in public as a Perkins Shibaura light industrial unit, and he rates it highly. In all his years with it, he has replaced exactly 1 component, the exhaust elbow, a Volvo part. That is not a coincidence, and the pattern repeats everywhere you look for it. Under the last video, a Hilux 63 owner published his own service history at 8,000 hours, 1 exhaust elbow, 2 raw water pumps, an alternator, an entire transmission, glow plugs, and a lift pump he had been through twice. In all of that, he had never once taken the head off. An Alaskan commercial fisherman running 33,000 hours on an Isuzu reported the same shape of ledger, working through an injection pump, injectors, several starters, water pumps, and roughly 10 alternators, while the head stayed bolted down where it was. The iron survives. The hardware bolted to the iron is on a schedule. Which brings us to a boat in British Columbia in the summer of 2023. The owner is cruising a Volvo Penta D1 255B. There is a small exhaust leak where the elbow bolts to the manifold of the heat exchanger, small enough to ignore. Over weeks, the exhaust fouls his new air filter and the engine stops. He is towed to the nearest port, where a mechanic finds the leak and patches it with JB Weld. Good enough to get him home, not good enough for anywhere else. That winter, he asks his Volvo Penta dealer what a proper repair costs. The quote comes back at $6,365.80 in parts. Labor on top of that at $189 an hour, then taxes. After that, yard time, because the job runs past a single day and the boat has to sit somewhere near the shop. His wife did the arithmetic and put the finished number at around $10,000. He is a retiree who had already spent his money on the house. He put the job off a year, then did it himself. When he shopped it, United States retail on the part, number 22898286, ran between $5,213 and $6,456. That single part number is the only replacement heat exchanger Volvo Penta lists for every D255 ever built. There is also an installation kit, number 3586996, between $514 and $660. Volvo Penta does not publish what is inside it. He asked the dealers. They did not know either. One of them had never heard of the kit. An engine failed. The block was untouched, and the Perkins Shibaura iron underneath it never had a thing wrong with it. What failed was the marinization, and the marinization is the one part of that engine Perkins did not build. Set that against a company selling the same class of engine and handling it the opposite way. Beta Marine puts the base engine in the model name. A Beta 38 is a Kubota BV 1505, and the Beta 25 below it runs a BD 902. Ask Beta for the Kubota service numbers for filters and belts, and they hand them over, because their argument is that a tractor dealer on any continent can supply you. One commenter last week described his own Westabiki as a Mitsubishi K2B10 horse tractor engine, 12,000 hours in and planning a rebuild at 15. He said it the way you say the weather. Volvo Penta publishes no equivalent mapping at all. Owners reconstruct which Perkins they own by reading the part catalogs of third-party suppliers in England. That gap is the entire argument, and it is worth being honest about the other side of it. Marinizing an industrial diesel is real engineering, and it costs real money. Freshwater cooling circuits, corrosion-resistant components, a marine gearbox, an alternator size for a house bank, and emission certification in 2 regulatory regions. Ed Sherman makes the point himself. Marine volume is tiny by industrial standards, so every builder in the sector starts from a tractor or generator line. Yanmar at least derives its marine range from its own industrial series, and Nani draws on Kubota, MAN, Toyota, and John Deere depending on the horsepower. Volvo Penta also carries the liability. When the D130 and the D240 failed United States emissions compliance, Volvo Penta ran a recall from July 1st, 2017 to July 1st, 2019, and handed owners complete replacement engines with a fresh 2-year warranty. That is not a company running from its customers. So the question is not whether Volvo Penta rebadges. Everybody rebadges. The question is, what portion of the premium is engineering, what portion is the dealer network, and what portion is simply the price of not being told? Nobody outside Gothenburg can answer that, because the mapping has never been published. For 30 years, the small Volvo Penta range has been a Japanese industrial block, marinized in England by a Caterpillar subsidiary, sold in Sweden's colors. 4 owners, 1 casting, and a filter that answers to a Toyota part number. Once you have seen the structure here, you cannot stop seeing it. The pattern behind a green marine diesel is the pattern behind the compressor in your garage and the badge on almost anything with a motor in it. The premium is rarely for different metal. It buys a nameplate and a supply chain that would rather you never looked underneath. Go find your engine's serial plate this weekend. Then look up the filter you have been buying and find out what else it fits. That is the work Yachts and Boats does every week, and the next one goes after the company that owns Perkins and what it has done to farmers who tried to fix their own machines. Subscribe so it reaches you when it lands.